My wife slept with my closest friend, and every person I trusted most knew about it before I did. They didn't pull me aside. They didn't pick up the phone. They sat at my kitchen table, ate the food I paid for, and looked me in the eye while carrying a secret that belonged to me. I found out by accident, the way you always find out things people are working hard to hide. My name is Theo. I was 36 when everything fell apart. I work in pipeline integrity, inspections, pressure testing, corrosion assessments on natural gas infrastructure across northern Alberta. It's not glamorous work. 3 weeks on a remote section of line, 1 week home, then back out again. My company operates out of Edmonton, but the actual job happens in places with a name that appear on most maps. The kind of places where your cell service disappears 40 minutes past the last town, and the wind comes across the flats like it has somewhere better to be. My wife's name was Simone. We'd been together since we were 24, married at 28. She was a dental hygienist at a practice in St. Albert. Careful, clean, precise. Exactly the qualities you'd expect from someone who spent her days millimeters from other people's problems. She was good at her job, and good at making people feel like they were in capable hands. I used to think that translated to how she ran our life together. I know better now. My best friend's name was Cody. We met in our first year at NAIT. He ended up going into trades. Heavy equipment operator, worked oil sands projects out near Fort McMurray most of the year. We'd been friends for 15 years. He was a groomsman at our wedding. He gave a speech that made my mother cry. Something about loyalty and what it meant to stand beside someone who'd always had your back. He quoted that speech in a text to my wife 7 months before I found out. I found that out later. Let me start from where it actually began. We were behind schedule on a section of line outside Valley View. A pressure test that should have taken 4 days stretched into 8. Because we kept getting equipment delays from the staging yard. I was exhausted, irritable, running on camp coffee and bad sleep. Then the delay resolved itself faster than anyone expected. The replacement manifold arrived 2 days early. We pressure tested overnight, passed on the first attempt, and my site supervisor told us to wrap up and head home. 3 days early. I didn't call Simone. I thought about it. I put the phone down and decided I'd rather see her face when she didn't expect me. That was the decision that changed everything. Not the betrayal itself. The decision to drive 5 hours home in the dark and surprise the woman I was married to. I pulled into our neighborhood in Spruce Grove. Around 10:30 at night. The subdivision we lived in had wide, quiet streets. And identical front yards. That everyone tried to make look slightly different, with their choice of garden border stones. We'd bought the place 4 years earlier. A 2-story with an attached garage, and a deck I'd built over 2 weekends in the summer of our second year there. Cody's truck was in the driveway. I drove past without slowing, parked 2 blocks down on a side street with my lights off, and sat there. Your mind does what it needs to do in those moments. It builds scaffolding as fast as it can. Maybe the truck broke down on the way to the city, and Simone offered to let him park it. Maybe he needed somewhere to crash and she'd set him up on the couch. Maybe there was a reason I wasn't thinking of, because I was tired, and I'd been on a job site for 12 days and I was reading something into nothing. I sat with those explanations for about an hour. At 20 past midnight, my front door opened. Cody came out first, pulling a jacket on. Simone followed him onto the front step in the hoodie she always wore around the house. The gray one with the UFA logo on it. The one I'd given her in our first year together. The porch light was off. The street lamp 2 houses down gave me enough. She reached out and held the front of his jacket with both hands. He said something. She laughed quietly. Then she kissed him, and there was nothing hurried or guilty about it. It was comfortable in the way things are when they've been happening long enough to feel routine. He got in his truck and backed out. She stood on the step and watched until his tail lights disappeared. Then she went back inside. I sat in my truck until 3 in the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't drive back up the block. At some point the furnace kicked on in my own house, and a light moved in the upstairs bedroom and then went out. I drove to a Comfort Inn off the highway and checked in with my credit card. I sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep. By morning I had decided on one thing. I would not give them a scene. The moment I walked through that door furious and devastated, they would have the chance to manage me. Simone would cry. Cody would apologize and call me brother. And tell me it meant nothing. They would negotiate the shape of the story, before I even understood it fully. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I drove home at 7:45 like nothing had happened. She was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when I came in. She startled, then smiled. The smile arrived about a half-second too late. You're home early. We wrapped up faster than expected, I said. She came over and hugged me. I hugged her back and felt absolutely nothing. Not love, not rage, nothing. I was already somewhere behind my own eyes watching from a distance. She asked about the drive. I told her it was fine. I asked how her week had been. She said quiet. Nothing much. She'd had dinner with her friend from the dental office on Thursday. I almost asked which night Cody had come over, but I didn't. I was not ready for her to know that I knew. I had work follow-ups to handle. I told her. I'd be in and out of the office this week. She said, "Take your time, you just got home." That was the beginning of 12 days I will never forget. Not because they were painful, they were, eventually. But because of what I learned about how much control a person can hold when they've already let go of everything they were trying to protect. While she thought I was at the office, I was sitting in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons in Stony Plain, going through 4 years of joint bank statements on my laptop. The transfers weren't dramatic. That was the thing. Nothing that would trigger anyone. $60 here, $90 there, a few hundred in a cluster 1 month, then nothing for 6 weeks. If I hadn't been looking for something, I would have scrolled past every one of them. But I was looking, so I built a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts. A column for what Simone had said at the time if I could remember. Restaurant runs. Groceries when she was covering for me. Gas money when his truck needed work. The amounts added up to just over $4,000 over 14 months. I didn't touch her phone. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it. I decided I didn't need to. And I didn't want anything I found that way to be something someone could argue about later. I had enough without it. What I found instead was the group chat. We had a family group chat. My parents, my sister Simone, her parents, Cody. We'd added him years ago because he was at everything and it was easier than forwarding. It was mostly used for hockey game times and Christmas plans, and the occasional photo of someone's dog. 3 weeks before I came home early, Simone had left the chat, just quietly removed herself. No explanation. She was there, and then she wasn't. I scrolled back to find the date. I searched through my own messages around that period to see if anything had triggered it. Nothing obvious. But the date she left the chat was 4 days after she'd sent my mother a photo of the two of them, at some kind of fundraiser, in the city. I called my mother that afternoon. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. Before I hung up I said, almost as an afterthought, "How come Simone left the group chat?" A pause. Just one beat too long. "Did she?" "I didn't even notice, honey. You know how she is with her phone." I said, "Yeah." I hung up. My mother had known. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after that call. The following Sunday was a birthday dinner for my aunt at my parents' house in Leduc. My parents hosted one every year. Big table, my dad's ribs, my uncle doing the same bad impression of a hockey commentator he'd been doing since 1997. I showed up with Simone. Cody was there. He always came to family things. He was that kind of friend. Watching the two of them in a room full of people who knew was one of the most clarifying experiences of my life. They were careful. They didn't stand close or exchange looks that would register on someone not paying attention. But there was a calibration to the way they moved, a practice distance that requires practice to maintain. And around them, my family maintained a different kind of distance. A readiness. My mother refilling glasses a moment too quickly. My aunt steering conversation away from anything that might get too personal. My father focusing very intently on the process of cutting ribs. I decided to run a test. I waited for a moment when I was standing near my father and my uncle and said, casually, that I'd heard there might be an opening on a northern BC project. Long-term contract, 5 months minimum, way off grid. My uncle said, "Sounds cold." My father said nothing for a moment. "Then is that something you're considering? Just keeping options open?" I said. My mother came out from the kitchen with a serving bowl. I watched her face. She looked at my father. Her expression was not curiosity, it was calculation. After dinner, she found me in the hallway by the coat closet. "Are you doing all right?" she asked. "You distant tonight." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired from the rotation." She touched my arm. "You know you can always talk to us." That's when I understood the full scope of it. She wasn't expressing maternal concern. She was trying to figure out how much I knew. She was managing me. I said, "I know, Mom. Thanks." I went back to the table. On the drive home, she'd had a nice time. I said, "Me too." She said my dad's ribs were better than last year. I agreed. She looked out the window for a while and then asked if I was sure I was okay. "Of course," I said. "Why? You just seem quieter than usual." "I've been on a work site for 3 weeks," I said. "Give me a couple of days." She accepted that. She turned the radio up slightly, and we drove the rest of the way without talking, which was exactly what I needed. The following Monday I called Marcus, an old university contact, who had gone into family law. He wasn't a friend exactly. We'd been in the same study group in our first year before he transferred programs. But he was sharp, and he wasn't connected to any part of my life in Spruce Grove. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Edmonton that I'd never been to before. I laid everything out for him. The night in the driveway. The bank statements. The phone call with my mother. The dinner in Leduc. The timeline I'd built in the spreadsheet. He read through what I'd printed, drank about half his coffee, and asked how long I wanted this to take. "I want it done right," I said. "I want it clean." He asked about the house. I told him I'd bought it 11 months before we got married. In my name only, with a down payment I'd saved during 4 years of northern rotations. We'd renovated the basement together, But the title was mine, and I'd continued making the mortgage payments from my personal account after we married, because the structure was already in place. He looked up from the papers. That's your biggest asset. And it's entirely separate. Keep it. What about joint savings? We had about $62,000 in a joint account. Our separate accounts each held less than $5,000. Most of our money had pooled into the joint account over the years because it was convenient. He told me I could withdraw from a joint account legally as a joint holder. If she challenged it later, the deposit history and the evidence I had would be relevant to how any dispute was resolved. Do it before you serve her, he said, not after. Is there anything that complicates this? I asked. He thought for a moment. Any chance of a pregnancy I should know about? No. That at least, I was certain of. He nodded once and we got to work. I want to be precise about the timeline, because precision is what I do for a living. I assess pipelines, I read data. I understand that the difference between a safe system and a catastrophic one is often a number someone recorded wrong or a step someone has assumed didn't matter. What I built over the next 2 weeks was no different. Wednesday I opened a new checking account at a credit union in Sherwood Park. Different institution, different city. No branch that Simone had ever set foot in. Thursday, I transferred $58,000 from the joint account. I left $4,000 in it. Marcus had advised me to leave something rather than clear it. It looked cleaner and gave me less exposure if she argued I'd acted in bad faith. Friday I called my benefits provider and removed Simone from my extended health plan. She was on her own plan through her employer, so this would not leave her without coverage. It would just end my obligation to carry her. That same Friday, I called my company's HR department and asked about their northern Manitoba project. They had a pipeline rehabilitation contract running outside Thompson. Remote camp, 6-week minimum rotations, no cell service in the field. I asked when the next crew was deploying. 3 weeks, HR said. I said put my name in. They said they were surprised. I'd only been back a few weeks. I said I needed to keep my certifications active and the project timing worked. They said they'd have paperwork for me Monday. Saturday I contacted a realtor in Spruce Grove. I did not want a sign on the lawn. I did not want an open house. I told him I needed a quiet listing, motivated sale, and I was flexible on price within reason. He came by on a Sunday while Simone was at her yoga class. He walked through in 40 minutes and said, the market in the area was strong enough that we'd likely see multiple offers even with limited marketing. He suggested listing just over $700,000, based on recent comps on the street. List it? I said. He asked about a timeline for showings. I told him I needed 2 weeks before showings began. He said that was fine, he'd do the staging photos first. I had an accepted offer before Simone was served. She was at work when the process server arrived. He met her in the clinic's front lobby at 10:45 on a Thursday morning. I know the time because Marcus texted me. I was sitting on a porch outside a motel in Stony Plain, drinking bad coffee and watching traffic on the highway. My phone started ringing 14 minutes later. I declined the call. Then the next one. Then 4 more. The texts came in waves. At first sharp and disbelieving. Then something that sounded like panic. Then a long message about how we needed to talk, how this wasn't fair. How I owed her a conversation before taking this kind of step. I did not owe her a conversation. She'd had several hundred days to have a conversation with me. Cody called. I declined it. My mother called 3 times in 1 hour. My father called once. My aunt called from a number I almost didn't recognize, which struck me as remarkable. I hadn't spoken to her on the phone in 2 years, but now she found it urgent. I turned my phone face down on the porch railing and finished my coffee. The following Monday I started driving north. I crossed into Manitoba on a Wednesday morning. The landscape flattened out and went on in the way that northern Manitoba does. Boreal forest broken by Muskegon Creek crossings. And the occasional flash of a lake through the trees. It is not a beautiful drive. It is a long drive. I didn't mind it. The job site outside Thompson was everything I needed it to be. The work was technical and physical, and left me with nothing extra at the end of a day. The crew was a mix of people from different provinces. The way camp jobs always are. And no be asked questions about your personal life because everyone in those environments is there for their own reasons. And those reasons are considered private by mutual unspoken agreement. At night the silence was complete. No city hum, no streetlights through the curtains, no sound of anyone else's life pressing against mine. I lay in my bunk and did not feel peace exactly. It was too early for peace, but I felt the absence of noise, and that was enough. 6 weeks later I came back to Edmonton and drove to Marcus's office. The DNA question was off the table. There was no pregnancy. The house had sold. The final number after agent fees and the early payout penalty on the mortgage was just under $640,000, deposited into my new account. She's asking for spousal support, Marcus said. Based on income differential. What's her position? She's arguing that she reduced her working hours during the marriage to manage household responsibilities, which affected her earning trajectory. I thought about the years I had spent in camp on northern rotations, while she managed a full-time career and a house that cost nothing in rent. I thought about the $4,000 in transfers. What's our position? He smiled just slightly. That she maintained full-time employment throughout, has marketable professional credentials, and that any income differential is a reflection of industry, not sacrifice. How does it look? Strong, especially given the circumstances of the marriage breakdown, which are documented. She was sleeping with her dental practice's new associate, by the way. I found that out through a mutual acquaintance, about 3 months into the process. Not Cody, someone new. Or maybe not new. I didn't investigate the timeline. I decided I didn't need to know. What I knew was enough. The divorce finalized 8 months after I filed. She received no spousal support. A small settlement for her contribution to the basement renovation. Her lawyer argued the improvement increased property value during the marriage. But that was the extent of it. It came out to less than $12,000. She kept her car, her savings, and her dental tools. I moved into a furnished rental near White Ave, in Edmonton while I figured out next steps. It was a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor, with a parking spot, and a view of the building across the alley. I lived there for 7 months. I did not hate it. I cooked simple meals and took long walks along the river valley in the early morning before the city got loud. And I began to understand what it felt like to live inside a life that was only mine. Cody sent messages for months. The first ones were apologetic in the way that avoids accountability. The kind of apology that says I'm sorry this happened, rather than I'm sorry I did this. Then they became more direct. He'd ruined his own life, he said. Simone and he had never really worked as anything outside the context of hurting me. Which was not something he fully admitted, but which came through clearly in how he described their situation. He'd lost his Fort McMurray contract because he kept missing reporting dates while things were falling apart. He was back living with his parents in Leduc. I read his messages. I did not reply to a single one. My mother wrote long emails. She explained that she had found out 6 weeks before I came home that night, that she'd confronted both Simone and Cody, that she had been told it was over, that she'd made the decision not to tell me, because she believed it was finished, and she didn't want to blow apart my marriage over something she'd been assured was done. She wrote that she understood if I was angry. She wrote that she'd made the wrong call, and she knew it. My father wrote once. Short, blunt. He said he'd trusted my mother's judgment on how to handle it, and he was sorry that was the wrong call. My sister wrote 3 times. Her letters were the hardest to read. Because she and I had always been close, I could hear her voice in the sentences and I could tell she'd been carrying it. She wrote that she'd found out at the dinner in Leduc, not before. That my mother had told her that afternoon. Which was why she'd seemed off all evening. She wrote that she didn't know what the right thing to do was, and that she'd chosen silence, and she hated herself for it. I did not write back to any of them. I turned my phone off for 4 days once. When I turned it back on there were 46 messages across various apps. I scrolled through without opening. Seeing the names was enough. I put the phone in my coat pocket and drove to work. About a year after I left Spruce Grove, a former colleague reached out. We'd worked the same Alberta inspection contract a few years back. He said my mother had contacted him to ask if he knew how to reach me, and that she'd seemed genuinely distressed. He asked, without much pressure, whether I was doing all right. I said I was. I thanked him and asked him not to pass the message on. He said fair enough, and I believed he meant it. I transferred to a long-term project in northern British Columbia that winter. A remote section of replacement pipeline outside Fort St. John. The crew was smaller than I was used to, 8 of us, and the site supervisor was a woman named Petra, who had 23 years in the industry, and the communications style of someone who had no time or patience for anything that wasn't exactly the thing she needed to hear. I respected her immediately. We worked through one of the coldest Decembers I've been through. Outside of a camp. In the Northwest Territories. The kind of cold where machinery behaves differently, and materials you've worked with for years start doing unexpected things. I liked it. That spring, I met someone at a field safety training course in Prince George. Her name was June. She worked in environmental monitoring for a forestry company. She was direct and funny in the way people are when they've stopped being interested in performing anything for anyone. She made a comment during a group exercise that made me laugh. Actually laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere you forgot was still functional. We got dinner after the course ended. She said she was 34 and had recently finished what she described as a very educational 5 years. I said I understood that. She said she thought I might. We did not talk about specifics that night. We talked about the work, about northern BC, about what it felt like to drive 4 hours to the nearest movie theater. She talked about a hiking trail outside Mackenzie that she said was the closest thing to a spiritual experience she'd had in the past decade. I told her about a morning on the pipeline, outside Thompson, where I'd watched the aurora fill the sky above the tree line, while the rest of the crew was asleep. And it had felt, just for a moment, like the world was genuinely indifferent to everything that had happened. And I didn't mean that in a bad way. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." We drove back separately. She texted me 3 days later. I responded. We were deliberate and slow in a way that felt right, because neither of us had any interest in performing enthusiasm we didn't actually feel. June never tried to fix anything. She never named what I'd been through as a wound that needed treatment. She just existed alongside me, at whatever pace suited the moment, and that turned out to be exactly what I needed without knowing I needed it. My old phone still had messages on it. I turned it on occasionally, less and less as time passed. The last time I powered it on, my mother had sent a message 8 days earlier. She'd stopped trying to reach me through other people, which I had asked her, through Marcus, to please do. Her messages now were mostly brief. Updates she thought I should have. My father's blood pressure, my aunt's knee surgery, my sister's pregnancy. She was due in May. That one I read twice. I hadn't spoken to my sister in almost 2 years. I put the phone down and stood at the kitchen window and watched the yard for a while. The next morning I called Marcus, not about anything legal, just to check in. He said my ex-wife had moved to Kelowna. He'd heard it indirectly through a mutual contact, new job, new city. I didn't ask anything else. He asked how I was doing. Better, I said. He said it sounded like it. 2 years, 3 months after I drove away from Spruce Grove, I bought a small house outside Fort St. John. 2 bedrooms, a decent-sized yard, a gas fireplace that actually worked. I paid the down payment in cash from a savings account I'd kept separate from everything else. Since the year I started working pipelines at 22. The mortgage was manageable on my salary. And I slept in my own bedroom in my own house, and no other name was on the title. June moved in the following spring. She brought books, an impressive number of books for someone who moved as often as she did. 2 good cast iron pans, a truck full of outdoor gear, and a terrier cross named Fig who had opinions about everything and was wrong about most of them. We did not have a ceremony, we did not need one. We signed what needed to be signed, had dinner at a restaurant in town, and came home and sat on the back step, with a beer, and watched the light to change over the field. That was enough, more than enough. My mother sent a card when I gave Marcus my new address for legal purposes, and word filtered back. I don't know how it filtered. These things always do. The card said she was glad I had somewhere permanent. She said she thought about me every day. She said she stopped expecting anything from me, but that she wanted me to know the door was open. My sister sent a photo of her daughter, born in May, 7 pounds 4 ounces. She didn't write anything in the message, just the photo. I looked at it for a long time. I did not write back, but I saved the photo to my phone, which was something I hadn't planned on doing. Cody stopped writing about 8 months after the divorce finalized. His last message said he was doing some counseling and trying to figure out who he actually was, outside of being someone's good time friend. It wasn't a bad message. It was honest in a way his earlier ones hadn't been. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it, either. People ask, not directly, but the question is always underneath things. Whether the silence is about punishment. It isn't. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. Punishment requires ongoing effort. Punishment is active. You have to keep choosing it, keep stoking it, keep checking in on whether it's working. I don't do any of that. I don't track their lives. I don't check whether Cody found direction, or whether Simone is happy in Kelowna, or whether my mother still replays the moment she decided not to call me. I removed myself. That's the full extent of it. They wanted me to stay in the room where it happened, and help everyone process the damage. They wanted grief sessions and difficult conversations. And eventually a moment where I said, "We'll get through this." Because that would have made the story manageable for them. It would have meant their lives could continue to include me, which would have meant they didn't have to sit with what they'd done to lose me. I didn't give them that. What I gave them was the experience of having someone they took for granted. Simply step out the door one morning and not come back. I live in a house that belongs to me. I work on projects that will outlast the people who made the decisions that led to them. I wake up early on my days off, and make coffee and sit at the kitchen table while June sleeps. And Fig occupies the entire bed in the living room, like he's paid rent there for years. In the summer the field behind the house goes long and gold. In the winter the sky over the tree line does things I still don't have words for. My old life is in a box somewhere in the garage. Not literally, figuratively, packed up sealed, no longer occupying the rooms I live in. There's a particular kind of freedom in that. Not the dramatic kind people write about. Not the triumphant exhale at the top of a mountain. It's quieter. It's the freedom of opening your own front door. And knowing that everything inside that house is exactly what you chose. And none of it is someone else's version of who you should be. That's what they never understood. They thought the silence was the message. They thought disappearing was a way of communicating how angry I was, how hurt I was, how much they'd cost me. They kept waiting for it to resolve into something they could respond to. But I wasn't sending a message. I was just gone. And gone, it turns out, was the only honest thing left to say.